The letter trembled in Dorothy Turner's gloved hand as the stagecoach rattled over the rutted trail toward Ventura, Wyoming territory. April 1878 had brought unseasonable heat, and despite the open windows, perspiration beaded on her forehead beneath her fashionable bonnet. The letter contained her future, a marriage proposal from a stranger named Samuel McAllister, who needed a wife to help run his ranch. What the letter didn't mention was that Dorothy wouldn't be arriving alone. How much further, Dory? 13-year-old Timothy asked, his thin face pressed against the dusty window. At her side, her eldest brother William, 22 and rail thin from their long journey, kept a protective arm around 11-year-old Joshua who had fallen asleep. Not much longer, Dorothy replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Across from her sat 18-year-old twins Matthew and Mark, both with the same sandy hair as their father, now 6 months deceased. Between them was the youngest, 8-year-old Daniel, clutching a wooden horse their father had carved before consumption took him away. The death of their parents had left Dorothy, at 20, the head of a family with no means to support themselves in Philadelphia. The advertisement for a mail-order bride had seemed like Providence a chance for a new life in the West, but she hadn't been entirely forthright in her correspondence. Samuel McAllister knew he was getting a bride. He didn't know he was getting 6 brothers-in-law. "He'll send us away," William muttered, echoing her fears. "No man signs up for 7 mouths to feed." Dorothy straightened her spine. "He won't. He needs a wife, and I'm bringing strong hands to help with his ranch." She hoped her voice carried more conviction than she felt. The stagecoach lurched to a halt, and Dorothy's heart hammered against her ribs. Through the window, she could see Ventura little more than a wide spot in the road with a general store, saloon, small church, and scattered buildings stretching toward the mountains that loomed in the distance. "This is it," the driver called, and Dorothy gathered her skirts, ushering her brothers out ahead of her. They stood in a cluster, 6 boys and a young woman, dusty and travel-worn as the driver tossed down their meager luggage. "Which one of you is Dorothy Turner?" A deep voice asked, and Dorothy turned to face a tall man in a faded flannel shirt and dusty trousers. His face was tanned by the sun, with laugh lines around clear blue eyes and a neatly trimmed beard that couldn't quite hide a strong jawline. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with early gray at the temples. "I am," Dorothy said, stepping forward and offering her hand. "Mr. McAllister, Samuel," he corrected, taking her hand briefly. His eyes moved from her face to the boys standing behind her, confusion evident in his expression. "These are," Dorothy swallowed hard, "my brothers. Our parents passed away and I couldn't leave them. I should have told you in my letters, but I feared you might withdraw your offer." She lifted her chin. "They're hard workers, every one of them. They won't be a burden." Samuel's expression was unreadable as he studied each of the boys. The twins stood tall, trying to look capable. William's face was set in determination. The younger ones watched with anxious eyes. "Madam," Samuel said finally, replacing his hat, "when I sent for a bride, I didn't expect her to come with reinforcements." Dorothy's heart sank, but before she could speak, Samuel's face broke into an unexpected smile. "Lucky for you, my bunkhouse has room. And I could use some help around the place." He nodded toward a wagon parked nearby. "Let's get your things loaded. It's a 5-mile ride to the ranch." The relief that washed over Dorothy was so profound she feared her knees might buckle. "Thank you," she whispered. "You won't regret it." "We'll see about that," Samuel replied, but his eyes held a warmth that gave Dorothy hope. The wagon journey to the McAllister Ranch revealed rolling grasslands that stretched toward distant mountains. Occasional clusters of cottonwood trees marked the presence of streams cutting through the terrain. Samuel sat at the front with Dorothy beside him, the boys crowded in the wagon bed among their trunks and valises. "It's not much to look at now," Samuel explained as they crested a rise, "but come summer this whole valley turns green, best grazing land in the territory." Dorothy could see a modest house with a covered porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Beyond them, cattle dotted the hillsides. It wasn't grand, but it was solid and well-maintained, far more promising than the tenement rooms they'd left behind in Philadelphia. "How many acres?" William asked, leaning forward from the wagon bed. Started with 160 under the Homestead Act, Samuel replied. Bought another 300 from neighbors who couldn't make a go of it. Running about 200 head of cattle now. All by yourself? Mark asked, impressed. Samuel's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the reins. Had a partner, my brother James. He died 2 years back, fever. His jaw tightened. Been managing alone since then. Hired hands during calving and roundup, but they don't stay. Dorothy studied his profile, seeing the grief he carried and recognizing it as a mirror of her own. I'm sorry about your brother, she said softly. Samuel nodded once, acknowledging her words without turning. The bunkhouse is behind the main house. It's simple but sound. No leaks. Stove works. As they approached the ranch, Dorothy saw that the house was larger than it had appeared from a distance, 2 stories, with a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. The barn was substantial, with corrals attached, and the bunkhouse was a long, low building that could indeed house several men. An older Mexican man emerged from the barn as they pulled up, wiping his hands on a rag. Señor Sam, you have returned with your bride, yes. And then some, Miguel, Samuel replied, jumping down from the wagon and offering Dorothy his hand. Miss Turner, this is Miguel Vasquez. He helps with the stock and keeps me from burning down the kitchen. Pleased to meet you, miss, Miguel said with a respectful nod. His eyes widened at the sight of the 6 boys climbing down from the wagon. Dios mío, you bring an army. My brothers, Dorothy explained, growing weary of the introduction but determined to face it squarely. The Turner brothers, Samuel added, surprising her with his easy acceptance. William, Matthew, Mark, Timothy, Joshua, and Daniel, they'll be staying in the bunkhouse. Miguel's weathered face broke into a broad smile. Good, this ranch needs young men, too quiet since Señor James. He trailed off, glancing at Samuel. Show the boys where to put their things, Samuel directed. Miss Turner, I'll take you to the house. Dorothy hesitated, looking back at her brothers. I should help them settle in. They'll manage, Samuel said firmly. You and I need to talk. With trepidation, Dorothy followed Samuel to the house. The interior was surprisingly neat, with solid, homemade furniture and braided rugs covering the wooden floors. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, and doorways led to a kitchen and what appeared to be a small study. My brother's wife kept things nice, Samuel explained, seeing her surprise. After she died in childbirth, James never recovered. The baby, too. He shook his head. That was 3 years before James passed. I'm so sorry, Dorothy said. You've endured much loss. Samuel's expression softened slightly. As have you, he gestured toward a chair. Please sit. We need to discuss arrangements. Dorothy perched on the edge of the chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Mr. McAllister, Samuel, if we're to be married, you should use my given name. Samuel, she amended. I know I wasn't honest about my brothers. If you wish to call off our arrangement, I understand. We can return to town tomorrow and seek other options. Samuel studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes intent. Do you want to marry me, Miss Turner? Or was I simply a convenient solution to your predicament? The directness of his question caught her off guard. I came in good faith. Your letters spoke of a partnership, of building something together. I found that appealing. She met his gaze. But I won't pretend there was romance in my decision. I needed security for my brothers. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Honest, at least. He leaned back in his chair. I didn't seek a bride for romance either. I need someone to help run this place, cooking, keeping accounts, making a home, and yes, to share my bed eventually. His candor brought a flush to Dorothy's cheeks. But I respect your position, and I won't press that last part until we know each other better. Relief flooded through her. Thank you. As for your brothers, Samuel continued, they can stay regardless of our arrangement. The older ones can earn their keep working the ranch. The younger ones should attend school in town when it's in session. Dorothy blinked back unexpected tears. You do that even if I don't marry you. I'm not a monster, Miss Turner. I won't throw children to the wolves. He stood, pacing to the window. But I do hope you'll honor our agreement. I think we could build something good here. Dorothy watched him, this stranger who would be her husband, and felt something shift inside her. Not love, it was too soon for that, but appreciation for his decency, and perhaps the first stirrings of respect. Then yes, she said firmly. I will marry you as we agreed. Samuel turned, nodding once. Good. There's a preacher comes through town every other Sunday. That's 3 days from now. Will that suit? It will. Dorothy rose. May I see where I'll be sleeping? I'd like to freshen up before dinner, of course. Samuel led her up the narrow staircase to a large bedroom with a 4-poster bed and a patchwork quilt. A separate smaller room adjoined it. This was James and Catherine's room. I've been using the room downstairs, I thought. He cleared his throat. I thought you might like your own space until we're more comfortable with each other. The small room could be for sewing or whatever you like. The consideration behind this gesture touched Dorothy deeply. Thank you. That's very thoughtful. An awkward silence fell between them until Samuel nodded toward the door. I'll leave you to it then. Supper's at 6. Miguel makes a decent stew. After he left, Dorothy sat on the edge of the bed, her emotions a tangled mess of relief, anxiety, and cautious hope. She had secured a home for her brothers. Now she just needed to learn how to be a wife to a man she barely knew. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Dorothy threw herself into making the house her own, cleaning and rearranging, taking inventory of supplies, and learning the rhythms of ranch life. Samuel was gone much of the day, working with the cattle and showing her older brothers the basics of ranch work. William, Matthew, and Mark took to ranch life with enthusiasm, eager to prove their worth. Timothy helped Miguel with chores around the barn and house, while Joshua and Daniel explored their new surroundings with the boundless energy of youth. By the 3rd day, a tentative routine had emerged. Dorothy rose early to prepare breakfast for the household, then spent her days putting the house in order and preparing meals. In the evenings, they gathered around the large kitchen table, the conversation gradually becoming less strained as they adjusted to one another. Samuel, she discovered, was a man of few words but thoughtful actions. He brought her wildflowers he'd found while riding the range. He made sure the younger boys had books to read and simple toys to play with. And he treated her with unfailing courtesy, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. On Sunday morning, they loaded into the wagon and traveled to Ventura for the church service. The small wooden church was packed with ranchers, townspeople, and their families, all curious to see Samuel McAllister's mail-order bride and her surprising entourage. The ceremony was brief and to the point. Dorothy wore her best dress, a blue calico with white lace at the collar and cuffs, and Samuel had donned a clean shirt and string tie. They exchanged simple vows before the traveling preacher, promised to honor and cherish one another, and just like that, Dorothy Turner became Dorothy McAllister. The return to the ranch that afternoon was subdued. The reality of their situation seemed to weigh on both of them. This was no love match, but a practical arrangement between two people bound by circumstance and necessity. That evening, after the brothers had retired to the bunkhouse and the house was quiet, Samuel found Dorothy sitting on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. You can keep your separate room as long as you need, he said without preamble, settling into the chair beside her. Dorothy turned to study his profile in the fading light. I appreciate that, but I don't want to begin our marriage with dishonesty. You have a right to expect a real wife. Samuel shook his head. I want a willing wife, not one who comes to me out of obligation. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. I think we could have a good life together, Dorothy, but I'm willing to wait for you to feel the same. The kindness in his voice, so unexpected from this rugged man, brought tears to her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Samuel squeezed her hand once and released it. Tell me about Philadelphia, he said, changing the subject. I've never been east of the Mississippi. So Dorothy told him about the crowded streets and tall buildings, about her father's work as a bookkeeper before illness took him, and her mother's valiant efforts to keep the family together until she too succumbed to consumption. She spoke of her fear when she realized she was now responsible for 6 growing boys with no means to support them. You're brave, Samuel said when she finished. Braver than most men I know. Not brave, Dorothy corrected. Desperate, there's a difference. Maybe at first, Samuel acknowledged. But it takes courage to travel across the country to marry a stranger, to bring your brothers into the unknown. Dorothy smiled faintly. Perhaps we're both brave then. As the weeks passed, the ranch settled into a routine. Dorothy managed the household with growing confidence, introducing small comforts that had been missing since Catherine's death. Samuel and the older boys worked from dawn to dusk, tending the cattle and maintaining the property. The younger boys attended school in town when it was in session, traveling with Miguel when he went for supplies. By June, the valley had transformed just as Samuel had promised. The grasslands turned a vibrant green, dotted with wildflowers in purple, yellow, and white. The cattle grew fat on the rich forage, and a sense of prosperity settled over the ranch. Dorothy and Samuel continued to sleep in separate rooms, but their relationship grew increasingly comfortable. They talked in the evenings after the day's work was done, sharing stories of their pasts and cautious hopes for the future. Samuel revealed more of himself, his childhood in Kentucky, his journey west with James after the war, their struggles to establish the ranch in those early years. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching a summer thunderstorm roll across the valley, Samuel turned to Dorothy with unusual hesitation. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice almost lost in a rumble of distant thunder. "The older boys need proper wages for their work. They're doing a man's job, they should be paid accordingly." Dorothy looked at him in surprise. "You're already feeding and housing them. You don't owe them wages." "They're not charity cases, Dorothy. They're good workers. William especially has a knack with the horses." Samuel's expression was earnest. "I want them to feel this is their home, their future too if they want it." A lump formed in Dorothy's throat. "You do that for them, for you." Samuel reached for her hand, a gesture that had become familiar over the weeks. "For us." Something shifted in Dorothy's heart, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Without overthinking, she leaned across the space between their chairs and pressed her lips to his. Samuel froze for a moment in surprise, then his hand came up to cradle the back of her head, returning her kiss with gentle pressure. When they broke apart, his eyes searched her face. "Dorothy, I think," she said softly, "that I'm ready to truly be your wife." That night, Dorothy moved her things into the main bedroom. Their coming together was tender and unhurried, Samuel showing a gentleness that belied his rugged exterior. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms, Dorothy felt a contentment she hadn't expected to find in this arranged marriage. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Samuel murmured against her hair. "Again?" Dorothy asked, curious. Samuel was quiet for so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. "There was someone before I came west. Her father didn't approve of a Kentucky boy with no prospects." His arm tightened around her. "I thought I'd carry that hurt forever. Then James died, and that grief overshadowed everything else." Dorothy placed her hand over his heart, feeling its steady beat. "And now I have you," Samuel said simply, "and 6 brothers-in-law I never expected." His chuckle rumbled through his chest. Life has a way of surprising a man. July brought scorching heat and the hard work of maintaining water sources for the cattle. August saw the first preparations for the fall roundup, when the calves would be branded and some of the herds selected for sale. Through it all, the bonds between the makeshift family strengthened. William, now confident on horseback, rode the range with Samuel daily. The twins had developed complementary skills, Matthew with carpentry, making needed repairs around the ranch, and Mark with the cattle, showing an intuition for handling the sometimes temperamental animals. Timothy, at 14, had become Miguel's shadow, learning the Mexican's considerable knowledge of horses and developing into a skilled rider himself. Even the younger boys found their places. Joshua helped Dorothy in the garden they'd planted behind the house, showing a surprising green thumb. Daniel, still the baby at 8, divided his time between everyone, soaking up knowledge and bringing laughter wherever he went. One evening in early September, as the first hint of fall crispness touched the air, Miguel burst into the house during supper, his normally calm demeanor shattered by urgency. "Senor Sam, riders coming 8, maybe 10, they have guns." Samuel was on his feet instantly. "Take the boys to the root cellar," he ordered Dorothy. "Stay there until I come for you." "Who is it?" Dorothy asked, fear clutching at her throat. Could be the Hardin gang. They've been raiding ranches south of here. Samuel was already reaching for his rifle above the door. William, Matthew, Mark, if you can shoot, I need you now. We can, William confirmed, the twins nodding beside him. Dorothy herded the younger boys toward the trapdoor in the kitchen floor that led to the root cellar. Samuel, she called, and when he turned, she said fiercely, be careful. The next hour was the longest of Dorothy's life. Huddled in the dim cellar with Timothy, Joshua, and Daniel, she strained to hear what was happening above. Muffled voices, the occasional shout, once the sound of breaking glass, but no gunshots, which she took as a hopeful sign. Finally, the trapdoor opened and Samuel's face appeared. It's safe now, he said, helping them up. The Hardins were just trying to intimidate us. They're gone. In the main room, William sat at the table with a cloth pressed to his forehead, blood seeping through. Matthew paced angrily while Mark stared out the window, rifle still in hand. William, Dorothy rushed to her brother. What happened? One of them backhanded him with a pistol, Samuel explained, his voice tight with suppressed rage. But Miguel recognized their leader, Frank Hardin. They've been causing trouble all through this part of Wyoming, demanding protection money from smaller ranches. What did they want? Dorothy asked, examining William's cut. Same thing. Said if we paid them, they'd make sure no harm came to our cattle or our family. Samuel's jaw clenched. I told them we don't pay criminals. What if they come back? Timothy asked, fear evident in his young voice. We'll be ready, Samuel assured him. And we won't be alone. I'm riding to neighboring ranches tomorrow. It's time someone stood up to the Hardins. That night, after the younger boys had returned to the bunkhouse and William's wound had been properly cleaned and bandaged, Dorothy found Samuel sitting at the kitchen table, cleaning his rifle with methodical care. You're going after them, aren't you? She asked quietly, sitting across from him. Samuel didn't look up. Not alone, but yes, once I've gathered enough men, we can't let them terrorize the whole territory. I could have lost you today, Dorothy said, her voice barely above a whisper. All of you. Samuel finally raised his eyes to meet hers. But you didn't, and you won't. I promised to protect you and the boys, and I will. I know. Dorothy reached across the table to touch his hand, stilling its movement on the gun. I just need you to understand something. She took a deep breath. I love you, Samuel McAllister. Not because you've given us a home or because you've been kind to my brothers, but because of the man you are. Samuel's expression softened, the hard lines of worry easing from his face. Dorothy, he said, setting aside the rifle and taking both her hands in his. I never expected to love again after Catherine died, thought that part of me was buried with her and the baby. His thumbs traced circles on her palms. But you brought it back to life, you and those brothers of yours. So you'd better come back to us, Dorothy said firmly. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Samuel promised, and pulled her into his arms. Over the next week, Samuel rode to neighboring ranches, building a coalition of men determined to end the Hardin gang's reign of terror. The day they planned to ride out, Dorothy packed food and medical supplies, her face a mask of calm that belied the fear in her heart. We'll be back in a few days, Samuel assured her, checking his saddle one last time. William, Matthew, and Mark stood nearby, also mounted and ready to ride. Dorothy had argued against her brothers going, but they had insisted, unwilling to let Samuel face danger alone. You'd better be, she replied, reaching up to straighten his bandana. All of you. The 4-day wait that followed tested Dorothy's faith and courage as never before. She kept the ranch running, worked alongside Miguel to ensure the cattle were tended, and tried to maintain a brave face for Timothy, Joshua, and Daniel. But each night, alone in the bed she now shared with Samuel, she prayed for their safe return. On the 5th morning, Dorothy was hanging laundry in the yard when Timothy's shout brought her running to the front of the house. "Riders coming," he called, pointing toward the eastern horizon. Dorothy shaded her eyes against the morning sun, her heart pounding as she counted the approaching horsemen. "There's Samuel in front," she said, recognizing his broad-shouldered silhouette. "And, yes, there's William, and the twins." Relief made her knees weak. "More riders, too," Miguel noted, coming to stand beside them. "And prisoners?" As the group drew nearer, Dorothy could see 4 men with their hands bound being led on horseback in the center of the formation. Samuel rode at the front, his face grim but triumphant. The Hardens. Dorothy asked when they reached the yard. Samuel dismounted stiffly, wincing slightly, and Dorothy noticed a bandage on his upper arm. "What's left of them," he confirmed. "Frank Harden and 2 others didn't surrender. The rest chose wisely." "You're hurt," Dorothy said, reaching for his arm. "Bullet grazed me, nothing serious." Samuel pulled her into a one-armed embrace. "Sheriff's meeting us here to take them to the territorial prison." He looked over her head at the younger boys watching wide-eyed from the porch. "It's over. They won't trouble this valley again." The territorial sheriff arrived by midday with 2 deputies. The prisoners were transferred to their custody, and the neighboring ranchers who had joined the posse began dispersing to their own homes, many stopping to thank Samuel for organizing the resistance. That evening, with the ranch finally quiet and the immediate danger past, the extended family gathered around the kitchen table for a celebratory meal. Dorothy had prepared a feast: roast beef, potatoes, early autumn squash from their garden, and an apple pie that filled the house with its cinnamon fragrance. "I have an announcement," Samuel said as they finished eating. He stood, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. "These past months have shown me something important. A man isn't meant to stand alone." He looked around the table, his gaze touching on each of the Turner brothers before coming to rest on Dorothy. "You all came here as strangers, but you've become my family." William cleared his throat. "Feelings mutual, Samuel." Samuel nodded, then continued. "I've had papers drawn up in town, legal papers." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded document. "This makes it official. I'm adopting you boys, all 6 of you, if you'll have me as your guardian." Stunned silence fell over the table, broken only when Daniel piped up. "Does that mean we'd be McAllisters too, if you want?" Samuel replied, smiling at the youngest. "Though I understand if you'd rather keep your father's name." The older boys exchanged glances, a wordless communication passing between them. William spoke for them all. "Turner McAllister has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Dorothy pressed her hands to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "Samuel, are you certain?" "Never been more certain of anything," Samuel replied, his voice gruff with emotion. "This ranch needs a future. These boys need a father, and I—" He looked directly at Dorothy. "I need the family you've brought me." Later that night, after the boys had returned to the bunkhouse, talking excitedly about their new hyphenated surname, Dorothy and Samuel stood on the porch, watching the stars emerge above the valley that had become their home. "I never thought it would turn out this way," Dorothy admitted, leaning against Samuel's uninjured side. "When I answered your advertisement, I was just looking for safety, a roof over our heads. And I was just looking for someone to cook my meals and keep my house," Samuel replied with a chuckle. "Seems we both got more than we bargained for." Dorothy turned in his arms, looking up at the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. "I wouldn't change a thing." "Not even the Harden gang?" "No." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Well, maybe them," Dorothy conceded with a smile. "But everything else coming here, bringing my brothers, marrying you, it all led us to this moment, to this life we're building together." Samuel bent to kiss her, a kiss full of promise and certainty. "Speaking of building," he said when they parted, "I've been thinking the house needs an addition. Those boys won't want to live in the bunkhouse forever." And he hesitated, an uncharacteristic shyness crossing his features. "We might need more room ourselves, eventually. For a nursery, perhaps." Joy bloomed in Dorothy's heart as she caught his meaning. "Are you saying you want children of our own?" "I'm saying I want everything with you, Dorothy Turner McAllister. A house full of children, growing old together, building this ranch into something we can pass down to the next generation." Samuel brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "If that's what you want too." "It is," Dorothy assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him again. "It's everything I want." Spring 1879 brought new life to the McAllister ranch. The cattle produced a healthy crop of calves, Dorothy's garden flourished, and the house expansion Samuel had planned was well underway, with Matthew supervising much of the construction. On a warm May morning, as dawn broke over the eastern mountains, Dorothy gave birth to a son they named James, after Samuel's brother. Holding the infant in her arms, with Samuel beside her and her brothers crowding around to see their new nephew. Dorothy felt a completeness she had never imagined possible when she stepped off that stagecoach just over a year before. "He's perfect," Samuel whispered, his finger caught in his son's tiny grip. "Just like his mother," Dorothy smiled tiredly. "He'll be as strong as his father and as kind. And with 6 uncles to teach him everything they know," William added, "he'll be the best cowboy in Wyoming territory." "Poor child doesn't stand a chance of being ordinary, does he?" Samuel laughed, looking around at her family, Samuel, her brothers, and now her son Dorothy knew they were right. Life at the McAllister Ranch would never be ordinary. It would be extraordinary, built on the foundation of an unlikely love that had grown from necessity into something powerful and enduring. "I came here looking for shelter," Dorothy said softly, "but I found a home instead." Samuel leaned down to kiss her forehead. "And I thought I was getting just a mail-order bride," he murmured, "but I got a whole family instead. Best trade I ever made." Outside, the Wyoming spring sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its golden light across the thriving ranch, a light that promised many more years of love, growth, and happiness for the Turner McAllister family.